Why did Jesus have to descend into hell after his death? Seeing Jesus on the cross, his loved ones felt devastated and hoped that he would stop suffering and go to heaven. But that was not the case. He was absent for 3 days. No one knew where he was from the Friday of his death until the Sunday of his resurrection. What did Jesus do during the 3 days between his death and his resurrection? Few people know it, but the answer is hidden in the Bible. The Bible makes mysterious references to the keys of hell, imprisoned spirits, and the empire of death. But what does all of this mean? Where was Jesus while his body remained in the tomb? Jesus himself, before dying, prophesied what would happen during those 3 days. So will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. What the heart of the earth means is a mystery, but Paul explains it. He explains that before Jesus rose again, he had first descended into the lower parts of the earth. These two connected passages show something important. Jesus, after his death, did not go immediately to the Father. Jesus descended to a specific place. But is this place truly hell? And why did Jesus have to go there? A mysterious verse explains that this place contained imprisoned spirits. Christ, being put to death in the flesh, preached to the spirits in prison. The phrase spirits in prison gives us a clue about Jesus' purpose. But if you think Jesus went to free these imprisoned spirits, that is not the case. The answer is more astonishing, but to understand it, we must first talk about Jewish knowledge of that time. That place, the heart of the earth, had a name in ancient times. In the Hebrew Old Testament, it was called Sheol. In the Greek New Testament, it was known as Hades. When the Bible speaks of Sheol or Hades, it does not always refer to the fiery, tormenting hell we imagine today. For the Jewish mindset of that time, Sheol was the general dwelling place of the dead. The souls of almost everyone who died went there, both the righteous and the unrighteous, waiting for the final judgment. Some Jewish traditions believed this realm was divided. One part for the righteous, a place of comfort sometimes called Abraham's bosom, and another for the unrighteous, a place of torment and pain. This helps us understand that the spirits in prison were not demons like Satan or fallen angels. They were the souls of human beings who had died before the coming of Christ. They were imprisoned because they were held in this realm of death, unable to leave it by themselves. They waited for a resolution. Jesus, in spirit, descends into this realm of the dead Hades, a place full of human souls who were waiting. And Peter's verse says he went there and preached. The purpose of his descent was not to suffer punishment. It was a mission, but it was not a simple mission. It was an incursion into enemy territory, a kingdom with a powerful guardian who would oppose him. The guardian, as Hebrews indicates, is Satan, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil. The Bible indicates that Satan has the empire of death. This means Satan's power was not only to tempt the living. His dominion extended to the destiny of human beings after death. He had authority over this realm and kept souls imprisoned under the power of death. No one who entered there could leave by their own strength. Jesus, therefore, descended into a kingdom ruled by his greatest adversary. And here another crucial clue appears. In the book of Revelation, the resurrected Jesus declares his victory with decisive words. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forever and ever. And I have the keys of death and Hades. The keys are a powerful symbol of authority and control. Whoever has the keys to a place has full dominion to open and close its gates. If Satan had the empire of death before, and Jesus now possesses the keys of death and Hades, then there had to be a confrontation during those 3 days. Jesus' descent then was an act of war and invasion to strip Satan of his authority. But why did Satan have this power? And why did Jesus decide to take it from him? To understand why Jesus had to seize control of death from Satan, we must first understand how Satan obtained it. The origin of this power goes back to the beginning, in the Garden of Eden. When Adam and Eve disobeyed God, sin entered the world, and the Bible is very clear on this. The direct consequence of sin is death. Sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin. And in this way death came to all people. Satan, being the original tempter who introduced sin, became the one who had the empire of death. Jesus, however, was different. Unlike human beings, he was free from sin. But for his victory to be complete, it was not enough for him to die. The domain of death was like a fortress, and the only way to enter that fortress was by dying. Jesus himself says, "I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me. I lay it down of my own accord." Death could trap sinners, but not someone sinless like Jesus. Jesus enters as a victorious conqueror. Paul speaks of his victory. "Where, O death, is your sting? Thanks be to God. He gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." There is a curious and very important detail. The Bible calls Jesus the first fruits of the resurrection. This means he was the first to defeat death forever, and he is the guarantee that all who believe in him will also defeat it. Jesus' victory in Hades was total. He had preached to the spirits who were waiting in the realm of the dead. He had taken the keys of death, and he had liberated the righteous who were waiting. With this, the story seems to have reached its end. But Satan, though defeated in the decisive battle, does not give up. His power over eternal death was broken. However, his ability to deceive and cause suffering in the world remained intact. Satan's new war would not be in the depths of the earth but on the surface. It would be in the minds of men. His first move happened on the very morning of the resurrection. Jesus' body was no longer in the tomb. His soul had returned victorious from Hades. Satan could no longer hold him, so his only defense was the lie. The Gospel of Matthew recounts how the religious leaders, in their desperation, paid the soldiers guarding the tomb. They ordered them to spread a false story that Jesus' disciples had come at night and stolen the body. The strategy was clear. If people did not believe in the physical resurrection, the victory over death would have no meaning for them. The conquest of Hades would remain a secret story without evidence. But the lie was not Satan's only response. His defeat also filled him with fury. The book of Revelation describes Satan as a great dragon who, being unable to destroy Christ, turns all his wrath against the followers of Jesus. Then the dragon was enraged and went to make war against those who keep the commandments of God and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. This explains what happened in the years and centuries. that followed the intense persecution against the apostles and the early church. Satan could no longer use death as a final prison for believers, so he attempted to use it as a weapon of terror during life. His defense became a vengeful attack against those who now carried the promise of eternal life, the very promise he had lost as a jailer. Thus, the victory of Jesus in Hades did not bring peace to the earth. On the contrary, it marked the beginning of a new kind of conflict. It is a war for the faith, the truth, and the perseverance of believers, a conflict that, according to the Bible, will continue until the day of the final judgment, when Satan himself will be judged and his defeat will be absolute and eternal. But there was another immediate consequence of the victory over hell. At the moment of Jesus' death, the dead rose and came out of the tombs in the cemetery of Jerusalem. Matthew confirms it. The tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. The descent of Jesus into the realm of the dead is not just an isolated interpretation. In fact, it was so important that it was included in one of the oldest and most respected texts of Christian. It is the Apostles' Creed. The Apostles' Creed is not a book of the Bible. It is a summary, a very ancient declaration of faith. Its earliest origin is found in Rome around the 2nd century. They were the words a person had to publicly declare in order to demonstrate their faith before being baptized. Its purpose was clear: to define, briefly and directly, the essentials of the faith, and also to protect the church from the first false teachings, which often denied that Jesus was a real man who had truly been born, suffered, and died. But here is a curious detail about its name. It is called the Apostles' Creed not because they wrote it together. Its name comes from a very popular ancient legend. It was said that each of the 12 apostles contributed one of the phrases of the creed before dispersing throughout the world. Although today we know that this is not historically accurate, the name remained. It reflects that its content is based on the fundamental teachings that the apostles transmitted. This creed, which millions of Christians still recite today, tells the story of salvation, and at the center of the narrative we find a very clear phrase about what Jesus did after he died. The creed says, Jesus was crucified, dead, and buried. He descended into hell, and on the 3rd day he rose again from the dead. But the phrase "he descended into hell" was not in the oldest versions of this creed. It began to appear and become more common in other declarations of faith starting in the 4th century. Over time, more and more people questioned whether Jesus truly held the keys to Hades, and the phrase was included in the creed to prevent doubts. But the Apostles' Creed is not the only ancient text that affirms this belief. Other early Christian writings stated it even more strongly. One of the most important is known as the Athanasian Creed. This creed is different. It is almost a theological manual, a deep and precise explanation of Christian beliefs. It bears the name of Saint Athanasius, a key figure of the 4th century. Athanasius was Bishop of Alexandria and the strongest defender of the Christian faith against a widespread and dangerous idea of his time. This teaching said that Jesus was not truly God in the same sense as the Father, but a created being. Athanasius fought his entire life to defend the full divinity of Christ. That is why the creed that bears his name is so important. It was formulated as a forceful and detailed defense against these false teachings, clearly defining the faith in the Trinity and in the double nature of Christ divine and human. And in this creed it clearly states about Jesus: he suffered for our salvation, descended into hell, and on the third day rose again from the dead. But there is another ancient Christian story that describes the descent of Jesus. It is a very popular ancient text known as the Gospel of Nicodemus. It is considered apocryphal, but it was immensely influential and respected during the Middle Ages. The second part of the Gospel not only states that Jesus descended into Hades, it narrates in epic detail how it happened. This story describes how a great light broke into the darkness of the realm of the dead, filling Satan and all of Hades with panic. It tells how Jesus, with a thunderous voice, commands the gates to open, and when they do not obey, he shatters them. The account describes Jesus binding Satan and then extending his hand to Adam, the first man. He lifts him and brings him out of the darkness, and behind him comes a great procession, all the patriarchs, prophets, and righteous ones of the Old Testament who had been waiting for his arrival in Abraham's bosom. Abraham's bosom was a special section of Hades. The idea comes from a parable told by Jesus himself, the parable of the rich man and the beggar Lazarus. In the story, the righteous Lazarus, upon dying, is carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom, a place of honor, and rest beside the great patriarch. The rich man, however, is in a place of torment. A curious detail told in the parable is that a great chasm separated the two places. No one could cross from one side to the other. The righteous were safe and at peace, but they were still in the realm of the dead, waiting. And in this place of waiting, there were no strangers. There were the great figures of all Israel's history: Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, King David, the prophet Isaiah, John the Baptist, and all the saints and prophets who had died trusting in the promises of God. They had lived and died in faith, but the final door to heaven had not yet been opened. Some of them had been waiting for centuries for the coming of the Messiah, the promised deliverer, who would finally take them out of there. But something happened on the cross that seems to contradict everything we have said so far. This is one of the arguments used by experts to claim that Jesus did not descend into Hades. One of the thieves crucified beside Jesus repented before dying, and Jesus made him an amazing promise. "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." This raises an important question. If the spirit of Jesus descended into Hades, how could he be with the thief in paradise that same day? The key is that, for Jewish thought of that time, the word paradise was also used to refer to Abraham's bosom, that is, the place of peace within Hades where the righteous dead waited. It was a paradise in comparison to the place of torment and oasis of peace within the domain of death. Jesus promised the thief that their souls would meet that same day in the place of peace, reserved for the righteous dead. And the reason is because Jesus was about to descend to triumph over Hades. Furthermore, there is another curious detail about the translation of this verse. The oldest manuscripts of the Bible, in Greek, did not have commas or other punctuation marks. These were added by translators centuries later. Some suggest that the phrase could be read in another way. Truly I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise. In this interpretation, today is the day when Jesus makes the promise, not necessarily the day on which it is fulfilled. Although this is not the most widely accepted interpretation, it shows how a small detail can open new paths of interpretation. The victory of Jesus in Hades and his resurrection marked a turning point. With the keys in his hands, Jesus became the Lord of the realm of the dead. With the keys, you can open and close the cells at will, just as Jesus did to set the righteous free. However, this does not mean that the prison was demolished. The structure of death and Hades as concepts still existed after the resurrection of Christ. Their final destruction, according to the Bible, was reserved for the end of times. The book of Revelation describes this very clearly. It speaks of a final judgment for all humanity, known as the judgment of the Great White Throne. Before this throne, all the dead, great and small, from all ages, are summoned to appear to be judged. And here, death and Hades play their last and final role. The text says, "The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them. And each person was judged according to what they had done." In this moment, death and Hades are no longer jailers. They are forced to release absolutely all their prisoners, so that they may face the final verdict of God. Their purpose has ended. Once they have given up their last captives, the destiny of death and Hades is sealed. They no longer have any reason to exist. They are the last enemies to be defeated. Revelation narrates it with a powerful and definitive image. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death. This is the end of the story. Death itself is destroyed. It is cast into what the Bible calls the second death, a state of annihilation and final separation from God. The very concept of dying is eradicated. On the cross, its keys, its authority were taken in his descent and resurrection, and its very existence will be finally erased in the final judgment. Thus, in the new heaven and the new earth that God promises, death will no longer exist. The victory of Jesus in Hades and the liberation of the righteous seem to complete his mission in hell, but were human. Souls the only prisoners in the underworld. The Bible hints that there were other captives once much more ancient and powerful than men. Other New Testament letters, such as Jude and 2 Peter, speak of this very directly. They mention angels who did not keep their own position of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling. The text says that God keeps them in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for the judgment of the great day. 2 Peter adds that God cast them into the abyss, putting them into gloomy dungeons and reserving them for judgment. These are not human spirits. They are the angels of a heavenly rebellion far earlier, and they are not in a waiting room like Abraham's bosom. They are imprisoned, awaiting their final condemnation. By entering Hades, Jesus did not only bring light to Abraham's bosom. His victorious presence would also have extended his authority to these prisons of darkness, not to offer them forgiveness, for their judgment had already been fixed since their rebellion, but to announce something terrible for them, that their leader, Satan, had just been defeated, There are some prophecies in older books that speak of this event. The early Christians saw this event as the direct fulfillment of ancient prophecies. The most important is found in the Old Testament, in Psalm 16. There, King David, speaking prophetically, says to God, "For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, nor will you let your Holy One see decay." Centuries later, on the day of Pentecost, just after the ascension of Jesus, the Apostle Peter used this very verse in the first public sermon in the history of the church. His reasoning was powerful. Peter reminded the crowd that King David, the author of the psalm, had indeed died. Therefore, David could not have been speaking about himself. As a prophet, he was speaking about the future Messiah. He was prophesying that the soul of the Christ would not be abandoned in Hades, and that his body would not see decay, because he would rise again. Peter concluded that Jesus of Nazareth was that Messiah. His resurrection was the proof that this prophecy had been fulfilled. Other texts describe what happened there as a direct confrontation and a crushing victory. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Colossians, uses very graphic military language. He describes Christ's victory this way: "And having disarmed the principalities and powers, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them on the cross." The principalities and powers are the ranks of the demonic. Powers, the army of Satan. Paul says that Christ disarmed them, a word that means to strip a soldier of his weapons and armor. And he not only disarmed them, he made a public spectacle of them. With this, Paul evokes the image of a Roman triumph or custom in which a victorious general would parade through the streets of Rome, showing his defeated and humiliated enemies before all the people. Paul is saying that Christ did exactly that. He publicly humiliated the spiritual forces of evil, showing all creation that they had been defeated. And after defeating the enemy and taking the keys, the victorious king frees the captives. Paul also describes this moment in his letter to the Ephesians, quoting another psalm. He says of Jesus, when he ascended on high, he led captivity captive. The story of the descent of Jesus, as narrated in the ancient texts, seems clear. However, throughout the centuries, Christians have reflected deeply on the exact meaning of this event. Not everyone interprets it in the same way. The main differences are found between the view of the older churches, such as the Catholic and Orthodox churches, and that of many churches that arose from the Protestant Reformation. For the Catholic and Orthodox churches, the descent was a literal and triumphant event. Christ, in his soul united to his divinity, descended into Hades, but not to suffer. His suffering had already finished on the cross. He descended as a conqueror light in the darkness, but many Protestant theologians saw this differently. For them, the phrase in the Creed, "He descended into hell," does not necessarily describe a journey to a place after death. They see it as a powerful metaphor, a way of describing the immense spiritual suffering that Jesus endured on the cross. According to this view, the true hell for Jesus was the experience of feeling the full weight of humanity as sin, and the abandonment of God the Father, a torment of the soul far worse than any physical pain. Thus, from this perspective, the victory was fully accomplished on the cross. This deep belief in the descent did not remain only in books or theological debates. It became the heart of the most important celebration of the Christian year, the Easter Vigil, the night on which the resurrection is celebrated. The day between the crucifixion Good Friday and the resurrection Easter Sunday is known as Holy Saturday. Liturgically, it is a day of profound silence, stillness, and waiting. The Church meditates on the rest of Christ's body in the tomb and, at the same time, on his mysterious active mission in the realm of the dead. It is the day when the king is in the fortress of the enemy, carrying out his work of liberation. This meditation is especially visible and poetic in the tradition of the Orthodox Church. During the services of Good Friday and Holy Saturday, very ancient hymns are sung. These chants describe the scene in a dramatic and moving way. They are often presented as a dialogue. Hades, personified as the guardian of death, cries out in terror at seeing a light that had never before entered his dark domain. He laments because the one he thought he had devoured is, in reality, the creator of life who has come to destroy his kingdom. It is the poetic narration of the conquest of hell, sung by the faithful. Thus, although the details of theological interpretation may vary, the central belief remains, from the ancient creeds to the hymns that are still sung today. The Christian faith affirms that the death of Jesus was not a passive end. It was the beginning of a victorious mission in the depths, whose triumph we celebrate every year in the light of the resurrection. All this story of angels, keys, and realms is not just a complex theology from the past. It has direct and very profound implications for our lives today. It teaches us something crucial about the resurrection. On Easter morning, when the empty tomb was found, it was not the beginning of Jesus' triumph. It was the public manifestation, the visible consequence of a battle that had already been won in the depths of the spiritual realm. Just as God works when we do not see him, Jesus did the same. And this victory completely changes our relationship with death. Thanks to this mission, believers no longer have to fear death as a dark end or a leap into the unknown. If Jesus has the keys, it means that the door of death is no longer controlled by an enemy, it is controlled by our Savior. Thus, death is no longer an insurmountable wall. It has become a hallway, a simple passage from this life to the next, into the immediate presence of Christ. This act of conquest and liberation is also the reason why we have direct access to God. The gates of Hades were broken. The barriers that separated us were removed. Many people have shared how understanding these 3 days transformed their view of life. They stopped seeing funerals and death as a tragic and final farewell. They began to see them as a see you later. They understood that paradise, the place of God's presence, is now open and inhabited by all the righteous who left in faith. And it is open because Christ first descended to open the way. In the end, the story of the descent into hell shows us the incredible depth of God's love. It reveals a love that was not only willing to die for us on a cross, but also to descend into the darkest depths